Think of this. In the democracy index, India ranks at 108, below Niger, which is ruled by a military junta and whose president is under house arrest, and also below countries like Kuwait, Malaysia, Maldives, and Sri Lanka. In the happiness index, India ranks at 126. As per the rankings, Pakistanis, Ukrainians, and Palestinians are happier than Indians. In the press freedom index, India ranks at 159. Taliban's Afghanistan ranks higher at 152. Pakistan, UAE, Brunei, Somalia, and Uganda also rank above India. India is the world's largest democracy, the fifth largest economy, and a rising superpower. Yet, if you look at some of these global rankings, you would think it's a land of despair. These rankings look like a cruel joke, if not outrightly biased and agenda-driven. They often paint a distorted picture of India's progress, leaving many puzzled. But why are these rankings so skewed? More importantly, why should we care? These rankings aren't just numbers on a page. They shape global perceptions, which can have damaging effects on India's economy and reputation. For instance, when India is ranked poorly on indices like the Global Hunger Index, it impacts a country's credibility. Imagine you are a foreign investor looking at India and you come across a report claiming widespread hunger and democratic backslide. You will surely hesitate, thinking India is politically unstable or facing humanitarian crisis. Even though millions are being lifted out of poverty, on the ground, the reality gets overshadowed by these misleading rankings. Beyond investment, these rankings influence international negotiations, trade deals, and diplomatic relationships. This isn't just a narrative issue. These rankings are like a global risk signal, directly feeding into assessments by global firms and financial institutions, shaping everything from credit ratings to interest rates on international loans. So, who are these arbiters of global judgment? Many of these indices, including those published by Freedom House and the Economist Intelligence Unit, are based in the West, particularly in the North Atlantic region. These reports are crafted by think tanks, NGOs, and even private institutions funded by governments and corporate interests. Take for example, the World Bank, which has its own set of indices and rankings, or NGOs with a global reach but headquartered in the West. As Foreign Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar pointed out, these organizations act as self-appointed custodians of global democracy, applying a one-size-fits-all framework to diverse political systems. Sanjeev Sanyal compared these rankings to money laundering. He highlighted the use of faulty methodologies, inadequate sample sizes, and perception-based surveys, which skew results in favor of Western-style democracies while penalizing countries that don't fit neatly into that model. But what's the root cause of this skewed narrative? One of the significant factors is the ideological bias of leftist academicians sitting comfortably in their air-conditioned rooms far away from reality. They claim to understand India. They flip through the pages of The Guardian, The Washington Post, and the New York Times publications that seem to paint India in a negative light. Much so that writers like Arundhati Roy and Rana Ayub compare India to some authoritarian dystopia. With a few strokes of their pens, these writers equate the world's largest democracy to Nazi Germany, totally disregarding the vibrance and pluralism of India. Journalist Fareed Zakaria, known for his well-thought-out and balanced takes on global issues, seems to make an exception whenever he discusses India. He often portrays India's democracy as faltering, amplifying narratives of American outlets like The Washington Post and CNN that consistently depict India in a negative light. And here's a shocking fact. A research by Crowdpack shows how professionals in the American media and academia are overwhelmingly liberal. Their exaggerated claims find space in global think tanks, shaping indices that penalize India. This bias is further entrenched in the methodology of many rankings. Institutions like Freedom House and v-dem rely heavily on the opinions of so-called experts, many of whom hold ideological grudges against India's current political establishment. For instance, in the Thomson Reuters survey, India was deemed as the most dangerous country in the world for women, even below Afghanistan. Without a surprise, this was based on the opinion of 43 India-based experts. You know who. It does not stop here. The problem goes deeper. For instance, India is often assessed on outdated or flawed data. These reports are often designed to reinforce Western superiority, reflecting Western values and norms that don't align with the unique political, social, and economic dynamics of India. For example, the Swedish-based v-dem Institute labeled India as an electoral autocracy, and Freedom House downgraded India from free to partially free in 2021. And leftist scholars, many of whom are disconnected from ground realities in India, play a pivotal role in perpetuating this. Their bias is not just academic, it's an attempt to hide India's achievements, discredit its governance, and question its democratic ethos on the international stage. But you might be wondering, given the obvious bias, why not just ignore these rankings? Unfortunately, that's not an option. These reports are influential because they feed into broader systems such as financial markets, international trade agreements, and multilateral institutions. Many Western investors, governments, and policymakers rely on them when making decisions about where to send aid, how to negotiate trade pacts, or where to invest capital. According to a government assessment, India's performance in global governance indicators like the World Bank's Worldwide Governance Indicators impacts its sovereign ratings, directly influencing investment and economic opportunities. Ignoring these rankings would allow them to dominate the global narrative unchecked. In fact, the Indian government began monitoring its performance in 30 global indices to track where India's rankings were falling short. And there has been growing urgency within the Indian government to address these downgrades because they result in real-world losses for India. So, what can be done? India needs to push back against these biased and agenda-driven narratives. Recognizing the need to challenge this biased narrative, India has decided to create its own democracy rankings. For example, India is planning to develop its own homegrown democracy index. This new index will reflect India's narrative, countering Western-based rankings that have consistently downgraded the country. The initiative, supported by Niti Aayog, is expected to provide a more balanced and accurate representation of India's democratic practices, which are deeply rooted in its unique historical and cultural context. The ORF, a major think tank in India that co-hosts the prestigious Raisina Dialogue, is spearheading this effort. But this move isn't just about producing an alternative index. India is beginning to push back against these global rankings by challenging their methodology and making sure that Indian realities are represented. India is also pushing for transparency and accountability from organizations like the World Bank, whose governance indicators have been criticized for negatively affecting India's credit rating. The government is also taking steps to expose the flawed data and opaque processes that many of these indices rely on. At the same time, India is actively engaging with global organizations like v-dem and Reporters Without Borders. Moreover, India must establish its own global media channels, similar to BBC, RT, DW, or Al Jazeera, to effectively voice its narrative on the international stage. Such channels would provide India with a powerful platform to showcase its democratic values, cultural diversity, and economic progress, offering a counterbalance to the often crooked narratives propagated by Western media. By owning its narrative, India can effectively challenge misrepresentations and influence global perceptions in its favor. These global rankings and reports have an outsized impact on how the world perceives India, influencing everything from trade pacts to investment flows. But as we have seen, these rankings are often flawed, biased, and motivated by ideological or political goals. Ignoring them would only allow these narratives to continue shaping global opinion. Instead, India must continue to challenge and reform the global ranking system by promoting transparency, creating alternative indices, and ensuring that its progress is reflected accurately. The global narrative needs to be as diverse as the world itself, and India is leading the way in making sure that happens. This is Mayank. See you in the next one.